I'm joined by my friend Tony, and my name is Scott, and I am the Grief and the Bereavement Coordinator for VNA Hospice Southern California, and been doing this grief work for about 5 years now. And beyond that, I am a minister, ordained minister, and been in ministry for 20 years, 10 of which have been in the field of hospice. And I'm really excited to be able to share a few things with you tonight from the things that I've learned from as a professional with death, dying, and bereavement, and also as somebody who has lost loved ones and people dear to me. I lost my dad to cancer about 5 years ago, almost, and it's been an interesting road. My journey of grief with that, and also now dealing with the slow decline of my mother since my dad's passing, and dealing with vascular dementia. So dealing with that from afar because they live out of state. So my other half of my family does. So that's a little bit about me personally. And Tony, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Tony Dixon. I lost my son Michael 12 years ago, and I was not healing well. And so I looked for help, and I found a bereavement support group, which helped me tremendously. And because I was successful in dealing with my grief, I became a facilitator to help others on their grief journey. So that's why I'm here. And you'll hear a little bit of personal stories about Michael throughout the evening.
Well, thanks, Tony. Well, to go ahead and get things started, I just want to let you know a little bit about VNA Hospice. We are a part of a nonprofit hospice organization, and we've been in the community for about 65 years, a little over than that. So we're a nonprofit healthcare organization dedicated to providing compassionate care to communities we serve. And we are hoping to be the trusted healthcare partner whose priority is to give back to our community. And part of our giving back to the community is doing educational webinars like this that's open and free to our community and to the world beyond since we are online. We have hospice services and palliative care services and private duty caregiving services that we offer out of the VNA of Southern California. So that's a little bit about us. But our objective tonight is to continue our journey of grief. This is Grief 102. We had done 101 a little over a month ago. And this is to continue that grief journey by taking a look at the common ways people grieve and discover the various styles of coping with loss. And attention will be given tonight to how the grief journey is stressful and practical ways to avoid adding stressful activities to our life when we're already having a difficult time. So this is really designed for those that have been in the grief journey for a little bit, not necessarily beginners, but not necessarily come out from the back end of grief and have found full healing yet. So that's a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. And to review what we covered in the previous webinar, which, by the way, you can look at the previous webinar. We do have a YouTube channel that we post all of our previous webinars on. So I would encourage you to go to that YouTube channel. Tomorrow or so, we will send out an email to you. It'll have the link to the YouTube channel on that email. So, and also on this webinar, we do have one handout that you can download. When you look at your little viewfinder thing on the webinar, you'll see a little area there called downloads. So you can find our little document there that we'll be referring to a little bit later. But for now, let's take a look at what we kind of covered last time. It's important to remember that it's natural in the grieving process to feel angry and or confused. It is a natural and normal thing to have those types of things happening to us. And so because that's normal, be gentle with yourself. Just know that it's going to take some time. Treat yourself as if you were in intensive care. You know, really do things to get plenty of rest, exercise, and eat well. It's very important. People that are grieving don't tend to eat well, and they don't tend to get enough sleep. And so do what you can to encourage your own healing in the grief journey through taking care of yourself. Be flexible with your plans. Do just what you are able to do. I know in early grief, it's really difficult to do a whole lot. We just simply have a foggy thinking. We just can't think straight. We have a hard time having motivation to get up and do anything. This is part of what makes grief difficult. So be flexible and just do what you can do, and not be too hard on yourself. And it's important to step in and out of your grief. We talked in the previous session about the dual process model for grief, which basically tells us that we have stress related to our grief in our life after we have a loss, and we have stress related to trying to move our life forward. And so there are times that we need to step into our grief and and process our feelings of pain, but then there are times that we need to step out of our grief and do something else to distract us from feeling that pain all the time. Because if we feel that pain all the time, we will then slip into what's known as depression. So depression and grief are very different things, but they can interact with one another and or cause each other issues. Okay, so another thing that's really important that we emphasize, especially in our support group environment that we run, is to say the name of your loved one. I didn't say my dad's name, as a matter of fact, when I introduced myself tonight. My dad's name is Bob, and I forget to introduce myself, and when I do that, to say my dad's name. It's important. Why is that important? It helps us to kind of bring them into our current space and stay connected to them. It's not that we lost just a loved one, but we lost our dad, and we lost, for myself, I lost my dad, his name is Bob, and to personalize that. And it's a very healing thing to do. At the beginning of all of our support groups, we have people do that, share with us who they are, what their name is, the name of their loved one, when their loved one died, and how they died. And that's important because that helps us in the healing process. And finally, in review of last session, STUGs. STUGs are a normal part of the grieving process. They occur at any time, but especially around anniversaries, holidays, or birthdays. They may be in the form of general malaise. So what is a STUG? Let me review that. It's a sudden temporary upsurge of grief. And a STUG is exactly what it says. It's sudden, it's temporary. We have a moment, we hear something, we see something, we smell something, we taste something, we do something, and it reminds us of our loved one, and it causes us to have this STUG moment where our emotions come out, and maybe we cry, maybe we laugh, maybe we do something in honor of that loved one. But one of the things that we have to understand is that these triggers and these moments of time for which our pain comes to the surface is very much a normal part of the grieving process. Tony, I'm going to go ahead and give it over to you to start our next session. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, as Scott said, it's important to be gentle with yourself and give yourself permission to grieve. Next slide. If people tell you you should be over it by now, remember that you have a Bill of Rights as a mourner. The full Bill of Rights is in your handout that you can run off later. It's from the book Grief for Dummies. But basically, the big time ones are tell yourself, I have the right to grieve the death of my loved one. I have the right to grieve in my own way. I have a right to demonstrate my feelings as I feel appropriate, and I have the right to attach my own meaning to the loss. So basically what we're saying is, if it's not self-injurious, if it's not illegal, you do whatever you can to get through the grief. You have that right to do that. Sue Berger broke down grief into 5 groups according to different ways that people grieve. The most common group are the memorialists. most people fall in this category. They try to create objects or rituals that perpetuate memories and maintain a connection to your loved one. If you look over my shoulder, there you go. Look over my shoulder. That's a memorial that my daughter made for Michael. It's a collection of his t-shirts. And as she put them together, that was part of her grief journey, remembering him in the different occasions and different places he had visited. And it was very therapeutic for her. But that's an example of a concrete memory that you can do. Some people will set aside a corner of a bookcase or a shelf with pictures. That's a concrete way to remember your loved one as you pass them every day. Maybe stop and take a moment to reflect. Maybe set aside a part of a garden where you can go sit outside and have your thoughts, collect your thoughts. Or you can incorporate a ritual. One of the ladies in our bereavement group continued after her husband died to say, "Hi, honey, I'm home," every time she walked in the door, because it made her feel like she was talking to him and maybe things were normal and maybe his spirit was there and heard it. So that's one ritual. Lighting a candle could be another one. Playing a favorite piece of music could be another one. You come up with rituals that are meaningful to you. The next group are the normalizers. They are the ones that want to keep things just how they were. And, oh, sorry, got the wrong one. Nomads. Oh, nomads. Thanks, Scott. Often they remain confused regardless of how much time has passed, whether it's 3 years or 30 years. They have no clear sense of themselves or their relationship in the world. They're still striving to define themselves and the place in the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we discuss the changing roles that happen once you have a death in the family. It affects not just your emotions, but in practical ways, it affects your role. Okay, next. Normalizers are the ones that want to get back to normal just as soon as possible. They have that love and security of that relationship, and they want to get back to that place. They really look more towards the future because they realize the past is the past. But one example I have about a normalizer is my mother-in-law lost her husband, and 6 months to the day, she married her second husband. And she was afraid that the family would think she was an awful person for doing that. But actually what she said was, if my first marriage hadn't been so good, I would not be jumping in both feet into a second marriage. And so it's really a compliment to my first husband that I would go for marriage again. Okay, activists often use this occasion to move forward, and they're motivated by their loss to make a positive contribution to society. You see this with the parent groups when we had the school shootings and so forth. The parents band together, worked for legislation, wanted to make the death meaningful, wanted something good to come from it. They might be fundraisers for a cause like cancer research. And their desire is to educate and empower others to do the same. And basically, I guess that's how I became an activist in the bereavement support groups, is because of my experience. The seekers are the smallest group. These are people that, according to their title, do just that. They're seeking what is the meaning of life. They might have a crisis of religion in some cases. They want to find a connection with others, with nature, and with the divine. And they do best when they can be around other people that are also seekers, that they can discuss these things with and find new meanings, hopefully. And so just because we put these categories together doesn't mean that you fit in any one particular category. Your grief will go on for the rest of your life to some degree or another. So even though maybe right now you identify as a nomad, somewhere down the road you might become an activist, or you might do a little of both. So just know that your grief is your own, and you have permission to grieve in the way that best helps you.
Awesome, Tony. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take us through our next little section here. We briefly covered some of this in our last session, but I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this question today. The question is, do men and women grieve differently? And I'm sure most of you are saying, yeah, duh, yeah, they do. But there's reasons why men and women tend to grieve differently from each other. Women in our culture generally are taught certain things. Little girls are taught to be friendly, nurturing, supportive, emotionally fragile. This is just kind of normal cultural awareness about what it means to be a woman. We have a social system that they tend to acquire over a lifetime. Women develop friendships more naturally with other women as comparatively to men. So they have a wider social system that's been acquired. Women are, interestingly enough, are expected to cry. They're expected to fall apart sometimes, express their pain openly and need that support. For whatever reason, this is kind of a general kind of a thing we think about when we think about women. Now, is it totally correct all the time? Absolutely not. It's just a generalization that we have about women and their emotional, because they are emotional. They have more emotions. They strive to feel connected to another person to survive their fear of isolation. So women just generally get themselves in relationships with other women, and especially during times of a crisis or a loss or something traumatic in their life. This is what we experience culturally as the norm. Now, what does that mean for men? Our cultural norm for men, my computer's running slow, we as men are expected to accept difficulties in their life with little emotional response. Men are just supposed to get through it. Our culture equates being strong with repressing feelings. Now, you can be strong and be emotional, but for whatever reason, our culture has said, and a lot of cultures say, that you repress your feelings to show strength. You act in leadership. I've studied leadership a lot over my adult years, and the old school generations would say, if you are a leader, you show no emotion and you show no remorse and you never apologize. It's never your fault. Those kinds of things. It's to suppress the emotional stuff. Now we're realizing that emotional intelligence and being able to relate well with others is a very big need for both men and women in our day and age, in our culture. But this is what's expected generally, that men are going to be more stoic in their response to a loss. Now, men also generally see themselves as autonomous, independent, and self-reliant. They see loss as something to be endured, and they're hesitant to seek support at this very time of need. And when they need it the most, they don't want to ask for help. I remember growing up, my mom and dad would oftentimes we'd be in the car and my dad would be driving. This is pre-GPS era, and he would get lost. And my mom would be the first to say, honey, stop the car, go in there and ask the person how to get to that place. And my dad would, no, I'll figure it out. I got it. So this is what men are supposed to do. They're supposed to be autonomous, independent, self-reliant. You can do this. You don't need help. Obviously, that is not the truth. So we need to move away from gender depictions of the grief process and the grief journey. Just because we are a man or we're a woman doesn't mean we have to fall in line with what is culturally considered the norm. That's an important thing. Now we have to realize that we have now kind of categorized it a little bit differently. We have two different styles. Kenneth Doka is a chaplain and grief expert in our in the hospice world, and he came out with these two styles to help people understand that it's not just necessarily about gender. It's actually more to do with a style. And yes, genders tend to gravitate to one style versus the other. So the first style is intuitive. The intuitive style of grief experiences grief as waves of feelings, expressing grief outwardly through emotions such as anger and crying. Okay, this intuitive style, people tend to cope with grief through expressing their feelings and talking about it. Expressing themselves and talking about it. Now, if you were to pick a gender for this, you would most likely pick the female gender for this style. So people who are intuitive tend to gravitate towards relationships and sharing with other people what their feelings are towards the loss. And that's a legitimate grieving style. Another legitimate grieving style is the instrumental style, experiencing grief as thinking about the loss and experiencing a physical reaction to the grief. So it's a cerebral thing. It's a thinking it through and physically doing something with it. And we tend to cope through physical movements such as exercise and work. They tend to cope with grief through doing something about it. Now, just because this tends to be a more masculine style does not necessarily mean that women don't do this. Okay, so I know plenty of women who, in their grief, really concentrate on work and go to work and go to the gym and exercise and deal with their stuff that way. That is a legitimate style of knowing and figuring out how to cope with a loss. So instrumental versus intuitive. So I want you to think about which one you tend to be more like. So the intuitive style grievers will tend to sign up for the grief support group environment quickly. And then the instrumental style folks are going to pick up a new hobby, or instead of dealing with their feelings, they're going to go do yard work instead. So we can all do these kinds of things, but just know that these are healthy and normal and real ways that people cope with their loss. And it's an okay thing, and you don't have to apologize for your style. Just know what your style is and work that style. But it is very important to learn how to cope with the feelings of loss that you do have, being able to express them in a tangible way. So instrumental style, just as an example, what Tony was referring to earlier as the activist. An activist is somebody who is coping with their grief through doing something about it. So these kind of things kind of go together hand in hand. So I hope that makes sense to you. I hope we can move past just the generalization of men don't share their feelings and women are so emotional they can't do anything with their life. And then that's not true. I think it all depends on what our own comfortable style happens to be. Now, thinking of styles, I want to move into another teaching right now about how families are affected by loss. So you have a loss of somebody in your family, and it doesn't just affect one person, it actually affects the entire family system. Every family has a system. Every family has roles. Everybody does certain things. We all have the complainer in our family. We all have the cynicist. We have we have the needy one in the family. We all have family systems, right? We have the matriarch, the patriarch, the people that hold the family together. This is all about family systems. So depending upon the strength of the family system, when a loss hits the family, what happens during that time, it really depends on how healthy the family system was before the loss. And when a loss happens, I'm telling you, either as a pastor, I have done plenty of weddings and I've done plenty of funerals, and both of those things cause friction in families. I don't know if I've ever been a part of a wedding that didn't have some sort of relational issue with a family member attached to it. And I can tell you right now, I've never dealt with a funeral. It's really rare that I deal with a death in a family that doesn't have some relational conflict happening in it. It just happens every time. So when a loss happens, there's a family system that rejects the loss. See, death and loss are never to be discussed in this family system. Children, however, sense dread, but they don't have permission to talk about it. They don't have permission to bring up anything. And parents rationalize their behavior by stating that the child is too young to understand what's happened. Okay, and if you want a little bit of understanding of what it means to discuss death and dying with children, we do have a webinar on that, and I do believe we have a recording of that on our website, on the YouTube site. We have a whole session on how to help children in the grieving process. But there are family systems that literally will choose to reject and act like the loss never happened. Then there's a family system who blames somebody for their situation. This is a system, a family system, that there's always somebody to blame for the difficulty the family is in. Whatever that happens to be, there's usually a black sheep in the family that causes friction enough that's just a part of the normal family system. The key themes of a family interaction might be, who did this? It's your fault. Guilt is huge in this family system. When there's a death in the family, it's blamed on somebody and somebody is laid guilt upon. The guilty power is usually associated with unresolved guilt from the parents or the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the family. Common styles of behavior in this family system is rigidity, control, and inflexibility. This is an inflexible, controlled family system. And when a loss happens, somebody has to take the blame for that system and that loss. There's another family system that avoids deep, meaningful relationships. And so I love this picture. This is so the reality of our world we live in right now. There are families that literally, when they come home at night, they do nothing to relate. There's no connection happening. It's absolutely amazing to me. And I've actually heard stories of this and how siblings don't do anything together. You know, I have 2 children and they play together a lot. They fight together a lot, but at least they're together and they're relating. They're not always on their devices, although they do that. They do that too. But their behavior in this family system, parents want family life, but they're fearful of intimate relationships. And so when there's a lack of intimate relationships, when a loss comes, their behavior is to avoid the pain of that loss. And so we just avoid the topic, we avoid relationships. The emotional tone of this family system is a cool tone, it's cold, it's not a warm environment. Children in this kind of a family system are rarely kissed, rarely hugged. There's no encouragement to kiss or hug. There's no kind of love expressed in this family system. And when this family system has a loss, it doesn't help anything, and they just continue to avoid it. Another family system is those that must carry on in the face of loss. I mean, let's just think about it. We're all busy, right? We all have busy families. We all have busy lives. We have busy work schedules. We have kids. We have things to get done. Love this picture. This is a family that's just kind of doing it all in their kitchen, all at the same time. This family system tends to deny or delay expressions of grief in feeling the grief of their loss because they're just too doggone busy. Okay, they value individuals, members. The value of individual members is not who they are as persons, but what role they play in the family and what they accomplish in that family system. And so we have to just get on with this, and we got to carry on. Never mind this loss, never mind it. We got to let it kind of put it on the shelf, ignore it, because we all have a job to do. We got to keep this thing going. Now, an example of this would be a family system. Maybe you have teenagers and college students, and you are literally you're literally busy making sure they're getting straight A's, and even through a loss, they cannot have a grade go down whatsoever, and there's consequences to that. So you have to keep moving forward no matter what the family has faced in that loss in their life. This is more important than actually dealing with the loss. And of course, with children, you would expect their grades to suffer, their relationships to suffer. You would expect all that, but in that family system, it's all about carrying on. And the next family system is the family who sees the loss as chaotic. It is absolutely chaotic, and this type of family generally exists in a borderline condition. This is a family that's already in chaos, and so when a loss happens, it's just going to make it worse. So this is the family that has problems financially, they have problems relationally, they have problems with health, they depend on social systems, social agencies to take care for them. This is a family that's constantly in turmoil and stress. This kind of system, children tend to not feel safe. There's parental discord a lot. There is just a lot of stress and chaos. And when a loss takes place, it just explodes even more because we don't have a healthy, supportive environment to begin with. So it's just absolutely chaotic. Then you start to become a little bit more healthy in the family system here. This is a family who attempts to handle the crisis. This is a family that recognizes their limitations and attempts to find help, and especially for their children. This is a family that's going to say, you know what, this is a loss that's hurting us as a family. We're going to try to do something about it. I'm going to get help. We're going to call in counselors. We're going to call in social workers. We're going to call in chaplains and pastors in our lives. We're going to get help to handle this crisis. This family will attempt to provide those opportunities for their children and allow them to grieve and to express their feelings. And lastly, this moves us into a family dynamic who remains open in their relationships, open in their emotions. Intimacy in this family system is at a high priority. When difficulties of family come to this family, the parents and children's can make progress to adapt to that issue and to that problem. They do it together. They are open to each other. They can tolerate each other and give each other grace and say, you know what, right now, I understand your emotions are out of whack. I understand you're angry. I understand you're sad. And you talk about it. The children may be hurt at times, but are not scared by the experience of loss. Children need to have a system in place in their family structure that says, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. It's not my fault what happened, and it's also, I know I'm going to be taken care of. And it's really super important in the process of grief as a family unit. So I'm going to have Tony come back on and talk to us a little bit about, in a family dynamic, your changes in your role.
Yeah. Just to sum up some of what Scott was saying, I noticed for myself that that the way I grieve has a lot to do with my own family structure, how I was raised. And I think sometimes we forget that we have these recordings going on in our background noise, always telling us what to do. But your family definitely will form how you relate to your stress of grief. Take just a minute to yourself and think how you would describe yourself before your loss. If you introduced yourself to somebody, do you introduce yourself as a teacher, a mother, a father, whatever? How would you describe yourself now? Are there new roles that you have now that you didn't have before your loss? And are any roles that you've given up? Maybe you saw yourself as a student and you had to drop out of school. Maybe you aspired for a better job and you had to give up on that. So those, think about how your role has changed. Scott, is there another, next slide? Which brings us to stress. Who doesn't feel stressed? Go ahead. This is a little bit of a definition of what stress is. It's the wear and tear on your bodies that you experience as you adjust to your continually changing environment. It has physical and emotional effects on us. Okay, next slide. There are symptoms of stress. Stress actually does change your body chemistry, and so oftentimes you'll have a physical reaction to it, and you can't figure out what's wrong. You go to the doctor, I don't know what's wrong. It could be the stress. And there's quite a few symptoms that we'll go through rapidly here. Scott? The other way? Insomnia, anxiety, depression, unexplained pain, headaches, indecisiveness. Now, last seminar we talked about fuzzy thinking, that your brain chemistry does change and you just feel like you're walking in a fog, and this leads to indecisiveness. You might feel pressure around your head, neck, and shoulders, back pain, stomach pain, and other symptoms associated with bladder and kidney infections. Pain in the arches of the feet, a feeling of fatigue, feeling wired or unable to relax or decompress, and you get ill easily. This is one reason that we hone in on self-care, that you want to make sure that you're resting, that you're eating properly, that you're getting exercise, because you are more susceptible to disease at this time. So what are some ways we can avoid stress? We know what some stresses are that we already are experiencing with our loss. There's the actual loss, and on the list of stressors, the top 5 are, the top number 1 is the loss of a spouse, and stress number 5 is the loss of a close relative. So just having that loss will make you very stressed and cause you to have a change in sleep habits, which make you tired and less able to make it through the day. Change in eating habits, that a lot of times instead of fixing a nutritious meal, we just grab whatever's handy. We drive through the fast food, and that doesn't help us recover our physical strength. Change in family dynamics. This was alluded to in Scott's presentation. Maybe there is a matriarch of the family, and if she's the one who died, who is the one who steps up and becomes the head of the family? We often hear young boys being told, well, you're the man now, man of the house now, regardless of their age. But there is a change in family dynamics as far as who's going to be in charge and who's going to be the comforter, and how are we going to make it through this. And there's a change in your personal responsibility sometimes, whereas before you had certain chores that you did, the house cleaning, the cooking, whatever, and there are other chores that your spouse did, the accounting, the gardening, all those kinds of things. And now all of a sudden you have that responsibility. So knowing that you're already going to be subject to these stressors, it's a good idea to avoid optional stressors. Any other changes that you can avoid, you should. For instance, if you're debating, should I retire or not? Probably that routine of going to work every day, having the support of your friends at work will help you. Changing jobs is another big stressor. Maybe you've been working for a promotion in a different field and you're thinking, should I go for it? And the answer is probably not, just because any change you go through is going to add stress to your situation. People oftentimes decide, oh, I need to move. You know, this house is too big for me just by myself. I need to get out of here. I need to move. Well, now step back and think about listing your house, downsizing, cleaning, packing, dealing with relatives, realtors, banking, all of those things add stress. So if you don't have to move, this might not be a good time to do it. There are exceptions, of course. One of the ladies in our group found her husband when she came home from work that he had died of a heart attack in their living room. And so from that time on, every time she opened the front door and walked in, she immediately went to that place, and it just always was very disturbing. So in that case, it made sense to make a move. If church is a place that you can go for counseling and consoling, maybe changing the church at this time isn't the best thing that you can do. And vacationing, hey, you know, that's a little bit of a surprise. We always think of a vacation as a good thing. And maybe indeed you do want to just get out of town. But again, stop and think about the stress that comes with going on vacation, the coming up with a timeline, coming up with the money, making reservations, getting packed, getting your passport, getting your papers together. Don't just think, oh, this is going to be fun. I need a relaxation. It can also be stressful. So just, I'm not saying do it or don't do it. I'm just saying think about it, because if it causes you stress, you don't need to be doing it. And because you do have all these stressors in your life, you need to postpone making any meaningful decisions. A lot of people say wait a year before you decide about that. And there's nothing really magical about a year. I mean, after a year, some people are still deep in their grief. After 6 months, some people, especially if they anticipated the death, some people are ready to move on and can handle it. But just a rule of thumb is if it's stressful and you don't have to make that decision, don't do it right now. So to get active in things that you can do, I mean, we've been talking to you about what grief is like, but there are some things that you can do that will help you on your journey. One of the things you can do is to write a letter. Anytime there's a death, there's regrets about what you wish you had said, what you could have said, what you could have done differently. And sometimes you just play that tape over and over in your head. And one way to get it out is to write a letter to your loved one. And you can include things about, I wish I had told you, what I wish I could ask you, what I would have done differently, what I want to let you know, what I will never forget about you. Just pour your heart out in a letter to your loved one as if they were going to read it. And it helps you also organize your thoughts. If you're feeling chaotic and you can get it down on paper, sometimes that helps you too. I know whenever I hear people say start a journal, I cringe because I have never been a journal taker and it seems like a lot of work to me. But it could be a very simple journal. You could just, on a calendar, just keep track of how you're feeling day to day. On a scale of 1 to 10, how was your day? And then the next day, on a scale of 1 to 10, how was that day? And just kind of keep track and see if the days aren't getting better. Or you could have a journal that talks about what was the best thing that happened today, what was the worst thing that happened today, and just write those 2 sentences and you're done. Another thing you could do is just keep track of 1 thing a day that you did to work on your grief. Did you read a book? Did you talk to a friend? Did you start a journal? Just 1 thing that will help you along your journey. Or you could have a different journal that just keeps track of how many hours you sleep and what you had to eat. What meals did you have? So for what I guess I'm saying is take that journal and don't think you have to write paragraphs and paragraphs. Just start something that's meaningful to you that will give you a little bit of a record about your grief journey. If you are prone to write something more detailed, you could go ahead and write a narrative of the day. Or if you had a stug that day, you could write about your stug and talk about what brought it on and how did you feel and how did you recover from it. Or if you're really missing your loved one, just sit down and reflect on your feelings for your loved one and maybe write a mini love letter, love note to your loved one. And then you could evaluate what areas do you need help with and why. But any form of journaling can be helpful. One of the gals I met, she was a year into her grief. And she was saying, you know, I've been doing this for a year and I feel like I'm not making any progress. And how long is this going to go on? And then she picked up the journal she started right after her husband had died. And she realized that she had been in a much darker place at the beginning of the grief. And she didn't realize that she had improved so tremendously till she sat down and went through her journal. So it's a way to keep track of your grief journey and celebrate your success. You can see that you are improving day by day. And then review your mourner's bill of rights. Like I said, it's in the handout, but you need to be proactive for yourself. And if you ever need an excuse to get out of something, you can always say, my bereavement facilitator told me this wasn't a good time for that, and I'll take the blame. But sometimes we try to come up with excuses or why not to. Just say, my facilitator said, no, it's okay. I need to take time.
Well, grief has no schedule. What I was saying about grief has no schedule, grief could completely disrupt your regularly scheduled thing. And it could also prolong your regular scheduled life. It could be short, it could be long, it might be a 6-month time frame for you, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. It really doesn't have a schedule. So just know that, and it really doesn't have a schedule. If you want to wear black, you can. This was, again, pieces of advice from Pamela Blair. If you need isolation for a while, that is okay. It's okay to spend time alone. Just don't make a habit of doing it all the time, okay? Because that, again, that leads to depression. If you need, if you find a safe time and place to go crazy if you want to, I like that one, to let yourself just go nuts, okay? If you have feelings of anger or just you got stuffed up feelings, I often tell people to take take out a pillow, put it on your face, and scream into it. Just as long as you take the pillow off your face so you can breathe again. So, but find a place and a time that you can just go nuts and go crazy, and it's okay. Nobody can see it. Make sure your webcam is turned off at that time. Be kind to yourself. Make a commitment to your future because you have one, right? When you're in the middle of grief, it doesn't seem like it. It's really difficult to have hope. It's really difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but there is. And so make a commitment to yourself that there will be a brighter day ahead. Get out of your own way. That's an interesting way of saying, you know, sometimes we cause our own struggles. And so just get out of your own way, affirm yourself every day. I love that Mourner's Bill of Rights because that could literally be a daily affirmation sort of thing for you to affirm yourself. Say, I'm okay, I'll get through this. Stay positive. Your life has not been a waste, nor, I would add, nor is it going to be a waste in the future, right? You will find meaning and purpose after your loss. It is possible. Fear is not always a bad thing. You know what? I teach this to children and teenagers when I get the opportunity because it's kids and teenagers that don't fear anything. You know, they just think that they're going to live forever and they just don't have any fear. A great metaphor to think about what this is, what this means, is I used to do a lot of surfing. I'm not in the water at all these days, but I remember when I would paddle out and the surf would be huge, the waves would be getting really big. Guess what? I would have a healthy fear of the power of that large wave, but it wouldn't cause me to stop wanting to surf. I would be like, oh my goodness, look at how big the waves are. Okay. And I would prepare myself for it. So having a little fear in your life is something that helps us be more aware of our surroundings. Having a little bit of fear can cause us to be alert and ready to take on whatever it happens to be that we're facing. And I believe, oops, I was going the wrong way. I think that's it. All right. We don't have time for questions. Looking at the time on here, but if you do have questions related to our talk tonight, please don't hesitate to email me back. We will send in an email tomorrow to thank you for attending tonight. But we are really grateful that you were here tonight. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If you would like to give us some feedback in an email, you certainly can. You could actually also request from us topics, maybe something that we didn't cover tonight that you would have liked to see cover. We would love that feedback. Tony, do you have any final words?
No, I just want to thank everybody for attending, and good luck with your grief journey, and remember that we're here.
Yes, well, I absolutely agree with that. We are here for you. The email will also have a link to our website to sign up for one of our support groups if you're not already involved in one of those. They do meet virtually right now, and we have various groups that are meeting, led by wonderful people who have gone through their own grief process as well. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight, and may you continue in your grief journey in a healthy way, with hope that there is life still to come, worth living. Thank you so much. You guys take care.